Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Nicholas Richardson and this is the news. Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, put pressure on newly inaugurated United States President Joe Biden today, stating that Tehran's definitive policy is that it will return to compliance with the 2015 nuclear deal only if Washington lifts the sanctions that President Donald Trump imposed on Iran. The JCPOA deal between Iran and 6 major powers limited Iran's uranium enrichment activity to make it harder for Tehran to develop nuclear arms, an ambition Iran has long denied having in return for the easing of United States and other sanctions. The Ayatollah told representatives of the country's military that Iran will not take the first steps to reconciliation. If they want Iran's commitments, some of which it hasn't abided by recently, if they want Iran to return to its commitments, the United States must cancel sanctions completely. And not by words alone or on a piece of paper, no. They must cancel sanctions in actuality, and we will verify and feel that the sanctions have been cancelled correctly. Then we will return to our JCPOA commitments. This is the Islamic Republic's definitive policy, and it is agreed upon by the officials of this country, and we will not back down from this policy. The president reimposed sanctions in 2018 that have crippled Iran's economy. In response to Trump's withdrawal, Tehran has breached the deal's key limits, one such as refining uranium to a higher level of purity, a step in the direction of acquiring nuclear weapons. President Joe Biden has stated that if Tehran returns to strict compliance with the pact, Washington will follow suit and use that as a springboard to a broader agreement that might restrict Iran's missile development and regional activities. Britain will not introduce COVID-19 vaccine passports, but people will be able to seek proof from their doctor if needed for travel to other countries. Britain's Vaccine Deployment Minister Nadhim Zahawi said on Sunday, speaking on the BBC's Andrew Marr show. Zahawi said that there were a number of reasons for this, as the Prime Minister had reminded Parliament.
No, we're not. And there are several reasons why we're not doing that. One, vaccines are not mandated in this country, as Boris Johnson's quite rightly reminded Parliament. That's not how we do things in the UK. We do them by consent. We yet don't know what the impact of vaccines on transmission is, and it would be discriminatory. Of course, you have the evidence that you've been vaccinated held by your GP, and if other countries require you to show proof of that evidence, then that is obviously up to those countries. But we've vaccinated, or we've given the first dose to 11.5 million people, and we have no plan of introducing a vaccine passport.
A COVID-19 booster and annual vaccinations are very probable, Rahawi added, as countries race to administer jabs in the face of new variants.
We see very much probably an annual or a booster in the autumn and then an annual, in the way we do with flu vaccinations, where you look at what variant of virus is spreading around the world, you rapidly produce a variant of vaccine, and then begin to vaccinate and protect the nation.
Britain has already provided nearly 11.5 million first doses of COVID-19 vaccines and is on track to meet a target to vaccinate everyone in the top most vulnerable groups by mid-February. Among coronavirus variants currently most concerning for scientists and public health experts are the so-called British, South African and Brazilian variants, which appear to spread more swiftly than others. Voters in Ecuador are heading to the polls for a combined presidential and parliamentary election today. Incumbent President Lenin Moreno is not seeking re-election, but concerns remain high that the election might still lead to wide-scale ideological violence sweeping the country. Ecuadorian soldiers stand guard over election materials in the capital of Quito as concerns about malpractices and electoral fraud remained high. The president, who was elected on a left-wing platform but later embraced neoliberal policies, says that the state will guarantee free and fair elections. It is not the responsibility of the executive to carry out the electoral event, but only the control of security. The rest corresponds to the National Electoral Council, who actually coordinates and has its budget, even for the electoral process. Regarding security, the transportation of the votes and the security of those votes are guaranteed by the government. National Electoral Council officials supervised as election materials were prepared and later transported to polling stations by soldiers. During the day, all the electoral packages as well as the technical kits will be distributed from here to each of the voting centres with the proper protection of the armed forces, who are in charge of the distribution. Voters will choose between maintaining the market-focused policies or returning to the socialist policies in place during the preceding decade. The polls give the lead to Andres Arauz, who is backed by left-wing former President Rafael Correa. Banker Guillermo Lasso trails behind him, with indigenous activist Yaco Perez in third place. The election is seen as an important litmus test on whether another socialist wave is about to sweep South America, following its recent electoral success in Argentina. Several hundred Yazdis have gathered in the village of Kojo for the first mass burial of Yazdis killed by the Islamic State 7 years ago during its brutal onslaught on Sinjar. In 2014, more than 3,000 Yazdis were killed and nearly 7,000 Yazdi women and girls were abducted and sexually abused by Islamic State fighters in northern Iraq, in a campaign described by the United Nations as genocide. The first exhumations of mass graves began in March 2019, led by the United Nations investigative team to promote accountability for crimes committed by ISIS. Amid high security measures, relatives of the victims carried 104 coffins into the village of Kojo, where Yazdis from Iraq and abroad were waiting near a newly founded cemetery. So far, 19 mass graves exhumations were concluded, among over 80 mass graves found in the area.
When we speak to survivors and when we ask them what is it that you want, the really first answer of most of them is we want to know where are our loved ones, what happened to them. So their loved ones are missing and they're either transferred in other country or they are in these mass graves that are all over Sinjar. So we know that there are around 80 mass graves in Sinjar.
Yazdi activist and head of the Airbridge Iraq organisation, Mirza Dinei, said that more steps are needed to ensure justice is done for Yazdi survivors, such as a law granting them recognition and compensation, yet to be signed off by the Iraqi parliament.
I hope this is a fair step of respecting the remains of those victims, and it will be also a step of transitional justice that the other victim and the women, the children who survived the genocide will be compensated, and I hope that we can do furthermore in the protecting the Yazidi and to say never again for the future.
The bodies were identified through DNA analysis after samples were taken from the remains found. So I'll read that bit again. The bodies were identified through DNA analysis after samples taken from the remains found were matched with those of relatives. Collecting DNA samples of victims' relatives is a challenge, as a large part of Sinjar's Yazdi population is now scattered around Iraq and across the world, while in some cases whole families were wiped out by the Islamic State. That's the news. Thank you for watching. Stay with us for the weather, Poland Daily Business and more programmes. But from me, it's have a good night and a better tomorrow.